Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 239 of the podcast. In this episode, I talk with Lindsay Felstow. In this conversation, we had actually a few months back now about leading Kidmin in a large church in the pandemic and beyond. And so what are some of the things that Lindsay and her church did? And this interview came about because I asked some friends of mine, what are some churches you know of that have done a good job pivoting, adjusting, adapting in leading throughout the pandemic? And I asked this, after almost a year had gone by. So it wasn't about, what are churches doing back in the middle of 2020, but after coming through almost a year of it, what are churches doing? And this was a church that was recommended. So I reached out to Lindsay, who I didn't know, and we had a great conversation about all the different things that they've done, that they've changed. They've maybe changed back again once gathering in person and all that kind of stuff happened. So you can listen and learn from their experience, get all the links and notes at nickblevins.com/episode 239. Before we jump into that, I want to ask you, do you use texting in your ministry? And I mean like a mass text service, not individually texting people from your phone. That's a great thing too. I bet you do. And certainly if you haven't, if you weren't doing that 6 years ago, maybe you are now, maybe you're not. I think you should. It's one of our best communication strategies. We really try to reserve texting for like a call to action in many cases, that it's kind of a reminder to take this step or sign up for that or to do this. We also use it for other things. We've been doing a 52 challenge in our church this year, where we're giving a different verse of the Bible every week, and you can subscribe to that via email or text, and so the text helps out there too. But the reason I bring that up is if you don't have a church texting solution, or you have one and you don't love it, which is very common, I want to recommend Clearstream. Clearstream is a great text message solution built for churches. You can instantly communicate with members, follow up with first-time guests, which actually that's one of my favorite uses for a text program or a text service like Clearstream. It has all the features you would normally expect, like text to join keywords, workflows to follow up with guests, mass texting. We use that all the time, every week. Two-way communication, personalized messaging. These are all great things that you can use in your church. And they even offer a bunch of options for multi-site churches or different ministries and things like that. And that's one thing that I know our church has benefited from as well. They work with thousands of churches. And one of my favorite things about Clearstream is that if you are a new church plant under a year old, or maybe you know somebody who's at a church plant under a year old, they can get Clearstream free for 12 months. But for the rest of us, it's not free, but it's still a great, affordable solution. If you're interested, check out nickblevins.com/text. All right, let's jump into my conversation with Lindsay Felstow, all about how they led Kidmin in a pandemic and beyond. Today we have Lindsay Felstow on the podcast. Welcome, Lindsay.
Hi.
So as we get started, tell us about yourself, your church, your role there. We were just talking before recording, but kind of give everybody an introduction to you and your church.
Yeah, my name is Lindsay Felstow, as he just said, and I have been on staff at River Valley Church for 3 years, and I'm one of the kids pastors at our broadcast location, Apple Valley campus in Minnesota, just south of Minneapolis. And we have 9 locations, and again, I'm at the broadcast one.
And you lead primarily elementary, right?
Primarily elementary, yes.
All right. And is that K to 5 there, or is it a different cutoff?
It's 6 years old to 5th grade. So
okay, gotcha.
We do age-based a little bit more.
So now I'm curious. We weren't even going to talk about this, but since you said that, I have to know. So 6 years old, like as soon as they turn 6, do they come in? Okay.
As they turn 6. Yep. As soon as they turn 6.
You're bringing new kids in, I guess, almost every week to that environment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing we're actually figuring out, because obviously every kid's birthday is different. So some 6-year-olds, I don't even know it's their first time when they walk in the door, because they're just so confident. They just walk in.
Yeah.
Some 6-year-olds, the parents tell me, like, this is their first time in here. And that helps me a little bit to kind of be like, okay, let's give you the tour and help you kind of find your place in here. So,
interesting. In our first building, it was so small, and like the hallways were shared with the auditorium. I mean, it was very like There wasn't even a central check-in. You checked in each room. Like, this is back in the day when we started our church. And And some of the building was just necessitated. That was so small, there wasn't even an area for centralized check-in. Our preschool was that way. So every room was by age, 2, 3. But one of the things I never loved about it was just that right there, the fact that something's changing almost every week. And then you had to manage that administratively behind the scenes. But that was what was most helpful for new guests, because it was easy to say 3-year-old, 4-year-old, right? As opposed to without central check-in, how would you even know? And then when we move to another building and have centralized check-in, we don't do that anymore. So everybody moves once a year, and that is a hard couple weeks, when everything's but everything else is great because it doesn't change. So that's interesting. I was curious to hear that. I want to talk about, your experience at River Valley with kids ministry throughout the pandemic and some of the shifts there. Nate Fitzer, somebody that I know, pointed me to you and your church and said, hey, from afar, I think they've done an awesome job leading kids ministry throughout this season. And so that's why I reached out and asked if you could tell me what it's looked like. And I know a lot of people just want to hear, how did you do this? And what does online look like? And what are you doing now? And all that. So before we do that, though, give me just a picture of kids ministry at River Valley pre-pandemic. You had 8 or 9 locations. You're at the broadcast original location. What did kids ministry look like there? What kind of curriculum do you use? Some of those things.
Yeah, so we had about 600 kids coming to the Apple Valley campus, 500 to 600, the numbers in that range every weekend, which was so fun. And I started kids ministry with that. so nice. I don't have any I'm also a pastor's kid, so I did grow up in a small church. So I know what smaller kids ministry looks like. I do have that background, but as far as being a kids pastor, I started preaching to 300 kids, to 120 kids per service. That's a large number of kids.
Yeah, definitely.
Midweek, they're all coming at the same time. So you have about 200 of them in one room, which is just insane. So yeah, it was a lot of kids, which when you're thrown into that, you learn to just roll with the punches. And I will say, coming from a small church growing up, it's very different when you have 120 kids in the room. How do you, and this is my room, speaking elementary. Obviously we had more kids in other rooms, 0 to 5, but elementary is, how do I make that one-on-one personal connection with a kid and know their name and something about them for 300 kids on a weekend. And my dad used to challenge me, your challenge is to know all your kids' names. And I was like, do you even know how many kids that is? That's a lot. He was like, doesn't matter. Everybody wants to feel loved and known, and the name tags help, but yeah, and putting a name to a face.
Yeah.
That was probably my biggest, not obstacle, but struggle, is I really want to make these kids feel like I know them. And so how do I do that with a large amount of kids? New families coming every single week. I mean, every single week you have new family come in, you're walking them through things, just trying to figure out how do you disciple a large group of kids. Yeah.
What is volunteers? I want to ask about curriculum, so we'll hit that in a second, because I know you write your own. So tell us a little bit about that. But before that, when you're talking about that number of kids, sounds like you're on stage sometimes, a lot, or maybe a lot of times. I don't know. What did volunteers look like? 120 kids at a service. How many volunteers did you have? Was it a small group kind of model, and they go in their small groups? Was it more of mostly large group, and it's almost like camp? I always joke that there's those two, and then there's the class model of children's ministry, like I grew up in Sunday school. Those are the 3 models. And so I'm curious. I'm not sure if yours was more small group or this large group, what I would call camp model. What was it like, and what did volunteers look like there?
Yeah, it's both. So our ratios for elementary, you have to have 1 adult for every 10 kids.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty normal.
Hit that every weekend.
Sure.
But there was an attempt, at least, to hit that. I will say, this is another little topic, but we have a program called Go Live, which is for youth students. So if you're in 6th grade through 12th grade, it's a program for you to help serve in Go Kids. And we had about 100 Go Livers. So,
wow, cool.
I mean, they run everything from stage segments to tech to our Fuel Depot, which is where they can do their Bible reading stuff. the worship, they do like a lot of that stuff. So every weekend we had at least 25 of them in the room. So that helps with the ratios as well. When you have 20 student helpers and 10 adults, I mean, it feels like you have a good amount of help in the room.
Yeah, that's great. Those are good numbers.
Yeah, even if we were like down on adults, some weeks, the go-livers, they help pick it up a little bit. And they're so mature. So not all of them.
Not all of them. That's true. It's not all of them. Yeah, our kids ministry is anywhere from a quarter to a third of the volunteers are our students. So we're in that same boat. I'd say it skews younger, like more of them serve in preschool than they do elementary, but there's we wouldn't be able to do it without them, which is just awesome. Of course, kids love them. They're like, they worship them almost. You just think they're so cool. So you create your own curriculum too. And that's going to be interesting for us to talk about in a moment when we talk about how you shifted online for pandemic. But what did it look like, pre-pandemic? You're writing it, I guess, creating all that stuff in-house and then doing it at the campuses?
Yeah, so we write all of our own elementary curriculum, which I think is so great. I think it was always my dream to write my own curriculum. And it was funny coming to River Valley because we read our own curriculum. So it was cool to like be a part of that and to be a part of it still, of creating what do these kids need to hear, what we can tailor it to exactly what we feel like, because it's technically our own congregation. I mean, it's a congregation of kids. So tailoring it to what do they need to hear right now, and being able to kind of like call audibles at some points too, of like, all right, this is something we gotta talk about. Let's write a series on it. And our kids team is pretty awesome. I will brag on them a little bit. They can crank some stuff out pretty quick. So again, there's 15 of us on the kids team, if not more. I mean, 15 is like the rounding number. Yeah.
And that's all the campuses you're counting too. And so I guess people at other campuses contribute to helping write. Is that how that works? Okay.
Yeah. We all kind of play our part. So some aren't as gifted in that area. And so they are totally fine saying like, I don't want to help. And that's okay. Like, that's fine.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
And some of us do. So we have a writing team that is a combination of different kids pastors from different campuses. So
gotcha.
And I am on the writing team. So
now real quick, do you write your own preschool curriculum too?
We do not. We use Life Church's curriculum.
Life Church's okay. Yeah. When you and I were talking before we recorded, for us, moving online with our kids ministry was a lot easier because we use Orange, and they just did an amazing job helping churches. It was already digital in a sense anyway. That's how you got it. And they were, they create great video content. So getting online was easy. Now, if you write your own, that's a different story, right? So tell me, how did that work, especially as quick as it went? How did that work for you guys?
It was pretty apparent pretty quickly, like, we got to figure something out. I mean, I said a little bit before, like we had talked about doing a YouTube channel for years and we just never did it. Now that hurt us a little bit, but it also kind of gave us a clean slate to kind of brainstorm, what do we want this to be? What do we want this to look like? And at the same time, we were starting to compete with the world, trying to get every kid's attention to watch their thing. So like TV shows, you have school, you have any and everything was online. And so now church is optional, obviously. But now, I mean, kids' church isn't as optional because your parents drop you off. But it kind of is optional at this point for kids because they can choose if they want to watch us or they don't want to watch us. So it was a little bit of a pressure of like, okay, we want to create something that kids want to watch, that they want to sit down in front of the screen and say, I want to watch Go Kids today. And that was kind of our goal, I would think, going into it, of how do we create something that's fun and engaging for kids and biblical at the center of it, but also is something that's grabbing their attention enough to have them choose this over a TV show or over playing a video game or whatever it is. So yeah, I said this a little bit. We had like a 3-hour meeting right off the bat with all of our kids team and just brainstormed everything that we thought of and wrote it down. And it was so funny because after that meeting, it all changed. As I think is the theme for just life during the pandemic. You make a plan and it changes pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was kind of the start of it. Like, what do we want to start with scratch from?
So what did you do? Did you basically record and what you would have done in person, put that online? And I know we're going to talk about how you regathered in person again, but just when it was just online, did you just start recording that stuff, producing it, putting it on YouTube, or what did it look like?
Pretty much we decided we wanted a game element. We did take our elements of service, but we didn't want to make a elongated hour service because kids aren't going to sit there for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly. Their attention span's a lot shorter. So we took our different segments that we do on the weekend and split them up into literal different segments. And so we did a game segment where we had the Nick and Morgan show. And so that was like our challenges and fun time for the kids to engage that way. And that was really fun. And social media played a big part in it too. Instagram and Twitter and like all these different platforms, Facebook. It's so funny. Parents, yeah, that was interesting to try and get parents to follow that along too. So we did the game show part of it, and then we knew obviously we wanted a biblical portion of it. And so then we did object lessons because at the same time, kids aren't going to probably sit there and listen to me talk for 7 minutes about a Bible story. I think I'm engaging, but I also nobody really wants to sit and watch someone talk for 7 minutes. So we were kind of like, how do we get kids to like really, really want to watch the screen? And we came up with object lessons was our best way of doing it. So we had elementary object lessons. So all of our Bible stuff was based around an object lesson, which was cool. So like, that was also interesting. I looked up so many I know so many object lessons. I can do an object lesson on any and every biblical topic that you have to offer. And then we knew there's also preschoolers watching. And so we actually then did our own preschool lessons at the same time where we read books or we did different Bible stories from like the kids' Bible and things along those lines. And so that was like our base starting of like, let's take biblical principles we think we want them to learn or biblical stories we want them to learn and present them through object lessons. And then let's do game things that are grabbing their attention and some preschool stuff. And that was like our 3 base things to start. So we did.
I'm on your YouTube channel now. It looks great. You like the thumbnails you all do look great. Looks like you got like a nice set, I guess, where you film this stuff.
Yeah. So that was also interesting. That was like so then like we did go into some full service elements for Easter and some other different things like that. We have full services on there with worship and everything. But we have one room for recording. And now everything's being recorded. Yep. So you have literal full service recorded. You have worship recorded. You have everything is recorded to be online.
Yep.
And there wasn't enough capacity to do kids and youth stuff at the same time of trying to produce all this other stuff. So we actually set up a production set up at one of our campuses and had like film people come in and we just contracted them out to do kid stuff. And at first we are in the main broadcast room now, like today we are, but at first we were kind of makeshifting, figuring it out, and it was great at first, but the quality, it was good, but it wasn't as good as it is now. And so, yeah, those first videos, we're even like re-recording some of the stuff we did like at first during the pandemic. We're re-recording it literally next week. So
nice. Yeah, I see one of these videos here is 10 months ago, and it looks like wood walls or something leaning. And then, but if you go like now at the top, it looks like your own little studio, which is fun.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Our set was probably the most rough, and then we got a little bit better from there. But
that's cool. Yeah. Now you went to meeting in person pretty early compared to most churches. Sounds like it was like last May, June, something like that. So you were online only for a little bit of a short time. What did it look like going in person? What kind of attendance did you get? How many volunteers came back? All the things that people are even asking about now, because there's plenty of churches now they're getting ready, to meet in person for the first time.
Yeah. So actually, when we first started meeting in person, we did not have kids' church. So we were doing family services for the first, I would say, about a month and a half. We were doing family services.
Okay.
So that's where we, as a kids team, were like, okay, how do we get families to come knowing they have to have their kids with them in the service? So we had coloring sheets and coloring crayons and like all these different things that kids could get on the way in the doors to hopefully occupy them, to hopefully have their parents get through the service. And also, like, kids can totally get things out of the main service as well. Like, I don't think sometimes we give them enough credit to where we don't think they can understand fully. And they might not, but they can grasp the main concepts of what's happening. So just, like prayer is a big one. Just praying like, okay, Lord, like just praying that some things that the pastors were saying we're getting through. But at the same time, we did our main services different. So we had a kids segment on the main stage in the main auditorium. So we would do worship and then we would have a kids segment. So we got, us kids pastors, we got 5 minutes to do, again, a 5-minute object lesson on stage to kind of grab the kids' attention, tell them, hey, we're here, kind of give them their moment to shine for kids to be noticed and recognized in the room. And then the lead pastor would come up and do his sermon and then we'd close. So we did have a kids element in the main service when it was a family service. We had 5 minutes every week.
Okay. And that lasted about 6 weeks, 2 months, something like that. And then you started kids ministry. What was attendance like, and how many volunteers were, ready to come back and serve?
Yes, that was a challenge. In my room specifically, I think I had 25 kids, like about per service to start, which was really hard for me. I didn't realize that I didn't really know how to communicate to a smaller group of kids. I was like, this is so hard and very different from what I was doing for the last 2 years. So volunteer-wise, we had probably about a fourth of our volunteers come back, I would say.
Okay, but you had, by that math, you only had 10% of the kids. So at that point, you were probably fine with the numbers.
We were totally fine with the volunteers and the amount of kids that were coming to start. Yeah. We had some drop off, and again, I kind of say like it was a lot of people's out, and like, oh, we're just kind of reevaluating some things, and we think we're gonna not do this anymore, which was like, okay, great.
Yeah. Good time. Yeah, which that happens anytime there's an opportunity. Certainly, something as long as this pandemic gives plenty of that opportunity. But anytime there's a big change like that, and people can use that to make a shift, a lot of them will, for sure. But we didn't even plan to talk about this, but obviously your experience with kids in a large room, there is a huge benefit to critical mass that is gone. I mean, we see it now, even when our church is gathered in person in the main service, what the room feels like when, we're here in Maryland, we're only 20. If we have a higher attendance day, we're 30% or something like that. So of our previous attendance, which means socially distanced, it's pretty light. It's pretty light in there. And that's like what you experienced with 25 kids in service. Now, a lot of people are listening thinking, I don't have 25 kids pre-pandemic total because the size of the church might be smaller. And that's where you just have to get creative with the room and the feel, because that's part of it. You probably had 25 kids in, I guess, the same room or similar that you had, 120, and that does, that feels different. So it might be, how do we change the feel of the room or whatever? But you didn't stay, at that low number of kids. It has slowly grown, right?
Right.
So what is it today? And then I do want to ask about, even because now, you're coming up on 9 months, 10 months, whatever, of doing in-person kids ministry, or maybe 8 or something like that, because you started a little bit after having the family services. So you've had some time to grow there. What size is it now? And then did you make any changes throughout those 7-8 months with in-person kids?
Yeah, now I would say we're at about half. So we have about half of the families and kids coming back. We have more new families than we had pre-pandemic.
Interesting. Is that, what do you think that is?
A lot of churches aren't open.
Okay, yeah. So you think they're just coming from other churches?
Yeah, they're coming from other churches. And we had like a crazy amount of first-time visitors when we first opened, because we were one of the first churches to open up in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. So people coming saying, I need to be here, and my church isn't open, so I'm here. And we still have that, like, to this day, we still have people coming and saying, like, our church still isn't open, so I'm giving this one a shot.
Yeah.
Cool.
I could see that. We have a church in our area that I'm connected with, and they open before anybody else. Now here, that means like the fall, not May, June. You know what I mean? Because pretty much nobody opened. And it's not true. There's some, but it was very rare to find churches that were in person with kids ministry indoors. It was pretty rare around here before the fall of 2020. But they were one of the first, and I do think they have seen a number of families come that they just wanted to attend in person, and their church didn't have that. So that's interesting. So you're at about half. Did you make any changes in there between, week one, probably a lot of different security protocols, some different feel, different things. Yep. And now, 7-8 months later, have you changed anything, or what are some unique things you did differently?
So to start, I mean, it was kind of like, how do we get as touchless as possible? So we had people at the screens typing in the people's phone number for them to get their tags. We had temperature checks. We had an outrageous amount of hand sanitizer around, like just crazy. Yep. You know what I mean? Obviously, everyone's wearing masks, but it was. And in each room, we had different toy sets that we would rotate through each service and sanitize through each service. So there was a completely new set of everything sanitized. Everything was sanitized and wiped down after every single service. So we actually spread out service times because we needed more time to sanitize the entire building within service times. And so we changed from pre-pandemic, it was 4 on Saturday, 4 p.m. on Saturday, 9:30 on Sunday, and 11. And we had to switch from 9:30 to 9 and 11 because we had to have time to sanitize everything. It just was taking a lot of work. Mm-hmm. And we had temperature checks. So everyone had to get a temperature check before they came back in to go, kids, parents, and kids, both.
Are you still doing that, by the way? Because I'm wondering, I know a number of people that stopped after a while.
We are not doing it anymore. So that's like a main thing that has definitely changed is we don't do temperature checks anymore. We stopped doing that about a month ago. And we also let them touch the screen now.
Yeah.
You touch the screen. Yeah.
Did you get any pushback when you stopped temperature checks?
No.
Yeah, that's what I've heard too. Pretty much everybody tells me they made that change. Like, nobody cared. Which is interesting. I'm sure some people do, but vast majority apparently not. We actually had
families who didn't want it, like on their forehead, us to scan their foreheads. They wanted to scan their wrists. So yeah.
Just interesting.
Different.
That's part of what obviously navigating pandemic has been is there's this continuum. There's people extreme on either end. Like anything you're doing that is restrictive, I hate, or you're not doing enough. What is wrong with you? Which is interesting. Anything else that you've done that's different or you had to change throughout pandemic in terms of what kids ministry looked like?
I would say like one of the hardest things for me is masks with kids. I don't know if you feel the same, but it's really hard for me to not be able to have facial expressions with the kids.
Yeah.
So that one's been hard. We never did it. We haven't changed that. They still have to wear them, but that one's like still an interesting thing for me. I would say mainly the main thing we had to change was sanitization of the rooms, and obviously everything was washed after the weekends, but we weren't literally squirting down the bleachers with like disinfectant pre-pandemic. Yep. We're not doing that. And it's like, it was just, funny how it all changes. But
yeah, people's view on the contact transfer totally changed now. Where like that's not as big of a thing as it was back last year for most people. Again, depending on where people are on the spectrum, they may still really, really care about that. But I would say, yes, the vast majority of people are not concerned about getting it through contact transfer as they are through, people not wearing masks or something like that. So,
yeah, a big thing too for us. And when our kids team sat down to talk about like coming back was for kids, the world has changed for them. They're not in school. They're at home 24/7. They can't play with their friends. They don't really know why. You know what I mean? They might know why, but they're not fully like understanding. And so we just really wanted to make it feel normal. Like we wanted it to be a place where kids could come and feel like, oh my word, I feel like I can just be here and I don't have to have all these different like stipulations or rules on me. We just wanted it to be a place where they could just come and feel like they could be normal again,
Yeah.
which is really important. So we try not to make any drastic changes.
Sure. Last question. What does online look like now with in-person still going? And maybe it's the same, maybe it's not. Like, because there's difference between when it was only online, then you're in person too, and now, you're months later. So what does online look like now while you've got about half the attendance in person?
Online is still being figured out, I think. We're still trying to figure out our strategy of, again, what is it that we're trying to do online? We do have about half back, so it's not really like we're trying. We are trying to obviously reach the people that aren't back yet, the kids that aren't back. So we have our worship songs on there. We're trying to also mix up the segments. So obviously trying to watch views. What are kids viewing? What are kids watching? They're watching the games. They're watching those different things. But also you can't do the Nick and Morgan show forever and expect, like, you have to switch it up a little bit. So we have like still girls versus boys challenges. We kind of like switched the Nick and Morgan to kind of like girls versus boys. We did a news show segments where we did like, again, like a news show where it was like silly, goofy, but then we had a Bible story within the news. So it was like, and now we're going to go to Lindsay, who's going to give us the Bible story for the day, or the good news for the day. And then I would tell my Bible story, and then it would go back to like the anchors or whoever was like doing that. But that gets old after a while. You can only do how many news shows.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're doing more of like a conversations type thing where Carter, who's one of our kids' pastors, is doing it's conversations with Carter, which I'm sure you've seen on the YouTube. Conversations, cookies, and coffee with Carter. And then one of us kids' pastors is kind of being like interviewed. There's a joke at the beginning, which is funny. And then I tell the Bible story, and he kind of does like funny things. And I think we're just always trying to figure out ways to reinvent and to make it better, which I think is good. So like literally even this last time we did cookies and Carter, and we're like, we should just add sound effects into it to make it funnier. So we did that last time. Just always thinking of ways to like, how can we improve this? How can we make it more interesting, more viewable, something that kids want to watch? I think is always the main question. So it's ever changing. But we've been doing for Wednesday night, we've been using our own curriculum that we record for online. We use it on Wednesday nights now. So
Okay. Gotcha.
That's our main curriculum for Wednesday nights is online stuff. So
yeah. Do you still have a Wednesday night in-person midweek thing for kids? And is it about half the attendance too?
Yeah. Yep.
About the same. Cool. Well, that's it was good to hear, from another church, what you're doing. I think a lot of people are 2 months in or haven't even started yet with kids ministry. So I think they're going to love hearing what it looked like. Some of it I think is just helpful to hear expectations. I mentioned to you that most kids ministries around here are 20, 30%. You're at 50% after however many months. And so it helps for people to get their arms around what to expect, especially when they realize that they're not getting half their volunteers back. You can freak out. You're like, wait a minute, but then you realize, the volunteer number and the kids number are probably going to be pretty close. You might have to stay a little bit ahead. We'll be adding kids ministry at another service here soon. And so we got to, ramp up the volunteer number, but we think, enough people respond that we'll be fine there. And so it's hard to know what reality is going to be, in a year or months this fall or something like that. But we just got to make do with what we can now. If people want to connect with you or anything like that, social media contact, how can they reach out?
Yeah, you can definitely reach me on social media if you want to. Instagram is Lindsay Felstow. Is it Lindsay Felstow 27? I actually don't know. Let me look really fast. Or you can email me. It's interesting because I got married during the pandemic and things are still figuring out how to be changed.
And getting married during the pandemic was probably interesting too. Like we were talking about, you thought with a August wedding, you were good to go. Like it's totally going to be gone by then. Meanwhile,
100% in the clear for a wedding in August, which was a joke, but we got married, and that's the most important part. It is just Lindsay Felstow on Instagram, and it's same on Facebook. You can message me on Facebook. If you want to email me, you can. It's lindsay.freetag@rivervalley.org. So LANDSAY.FREITAG.
Haven't changed that part yet. Maybe gotta.
I know. I'm waiting for my official name to be changed for that to actually be able to be changed, which is a whole mess too. So don't try to change the name right now.
Yeah, well, anything attached to government in the pandemic, not going so well. It's kind of like the mail. So cool. Well, Lindsay, thanks for taking time to come on the podcast. Great job leading through the pandemic. I mean, we're all just trying to figure it out, kind of like you said. And so good job with what you all are doing there and the YouTube channel and your online presence and all that. So thanks for coming on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was so fun.
It was great to hear from Lindsay all about what her church has done to lead Kidmin in their church, in a large multi-site church, in the pandemic and beyond, the things they've adjusted, all of that. You can get all the links and notes from this episode at nickblevins.com/episode 239. Remember, like I talked about in the beginning, if you don't have a tech solution for your church or you just want a better one, check out Clearstream at nickblevins.com/text. We'll be back next week. I've actually had a couple interviews. This one was a little bit older and took a while to get out to you, but all of it still applies. We have a few interviews that I did before the pandemic. And remember back when it was only 2 weeks to slow the curve? Well, I held on to those interviews because they were so based on in-person gatherings and just been hanging on to them ever since. I mean, some of it talks about volunteer appreciation with big events, something we weren't doing in the pandemic, growing student ministry beyond 10%, which I guess, depending on how you count online, you could do that, but still a little bit different. Leading volunteers, which that always applies, really doesn't matter what the context is. But I'm going to release those now in the next few weeks. Feels like we're enough to the point where pretty much every church or almost every church I know of is meeting in person in some way. And so you're going to hear from those episodes. And then we're going to bring in episodes, just some select topics and conversations from the Multiply Ministry Conference breakouts. So maybe you attended it, you watched some, maybe you got the All Access Pass, or maybe you're a member and you can watch all of it. But even if not, you're going to get to hear some snippets here on the podcast. So all that's coming. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of it. And I'll catch you next week in the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.